Yeah, my first question. How will business best conduct a health and safety risk assessment in each workplace?
How will they conduct health and safety assessment in each
Assessment,
workplace?
risk assessment in each workplace.
Well, that's a great question. Well, I can't give you an idea about each workplace as I can probably do industries.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a little. I'll start with the one I'm nervous about. In the retail sector, I'm nervous about the health and safety checks that go on in the retail sector. So, and a lot of you guys are doing work in the retail sector probably right now. Like Harpreet, you told me you worked in a retail place,
Mhm.
and so I'm a little bit nervous because I don't think that they're doing checks. They're just expecting that people will self-report if they're sick, and once they start experiencing symptoms, then they have to say I'm experiencing symptoms of COVID, and I'm going to go get checked, and then they're off until the tests come back, at least, if not later, right? So I think that's the only thing that they're doing. So there are those sort of situations which can lead to the spread of the virus, but it can also lead staff members to get sick, right? So there's a big opening in that. Um, eh, but in other industries, there's temperature checks. So they've been doing temperature checks to see if people have fevers. Sometimes you can't even tell if you have your own fever, right? So a good example in this situation is, for example, I went and got some dental work, and I'm speaking with dentures right now. So if it sounds like I'm a little bit lisping, it's because I got dentures. But when I went to the dentist, they would do a temperature check, and I had to do a self-declaration, and then I had to rinse out, sanitize, wash my hands, and sanitize my hands with a hand sanitizer. That was a bit more thorough of a kind of check. So that's not a retail. That has some medical things. So it's the same thing at at the eye doctor too. So I found that when there's any work being done on mouth, eyes, or ears, that kind of thing, the sanitary checks and health checks are a little bit more stringent than they would be in retail. Um, and but as far as I can understand, most industries are or physical distancing as much as possible. So that means that people are working kind of apart as possible. In the schools, I'm nervous though. I'm worried about in education a little bit too, because it's not easy to physical distance. So, for example, there's 3 different responses that are happening at 3 different universities in Edmonton, and so and there's a variety of levels of severity of the health checks and safety that are going in. So I'm going to have to go back into face-to-face classes next term. I'm not teaching online starting in September, or I will teach only a little bit online. With one of the universities, I kind of have half in the classroom, half online.
Mhm.
But with MacEwan, for example, it'll be completely face-to-face. So there's variances between the university's responses here, and so I'm not sure the complete face-to-face will be the safest way to do it.
Yeah, as like in the next semester, are all the classes are face to face,
Yeah,
except
yeah. And you guys as second semester students, you guys have to go back into the classroom, and there's a specific rule that is in place that they have to meet. So they're trying to strike a balance. So what happened is your student visas require that you have to be in class face to face for a certain number of hours of your course, right? For up to 50% of your course. So they're putting you back in the classroom because you haven't had that yet, right? You haven't had the number of required hours yet to meet the requirements of your student visa. So that's why you have to go back in face to face.
Yeah.
And I think certain teachers will make adjustments about this, so that maybe teachers will say half the students show up one class, half the students show up the other, and then there's a
Mhm.
little bit of online work. but it's not going to be there'll be a large amount of uniformity, but some teachers I think will play with it a little bit just to keep people safe.
Yeah, some people maybe face difficulty due to this.
Yeah, there will be some difficulties, and I almost guarantee that not just at McEwen, but in any school setting,
Yeah,
that some people will get sick. I think that will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of the industry's health measures and checks. That covers a few of them anyway.
we can say it is very company to company and organization to organization. We can say.
Yeah, it is quite complicated to organize. There'll be markers in the hallways and stuff like that, physical distancing recommendations,
Yeah,
and I would recommend all students, even if it's not mandatory from the government, I'd recommend all students be wearing masks.
It is compulsory from, I think, 1st August. Yeah.
Yeah, but not in the schools. I think it might be
yeah,
in the universities, but not in
Public.
the schools.
yeah.
Not in the public schools. It's not yet mandatory. They
Yeah.
haven't made that yet. So I'm nervous about my kids going to school, for example.
It is difficulty to for kids in our schools.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
India, if we talk about India, they didn't open any school yet.
Yeah. But Canada India is spiking, right? Like, so India is really, really climbing, right?
Yeah.
Canada's having a bit of a surge right now, but it may not be that huge of a surge. They might have to change if we start getting close to capacity in our hospitals, but we're not near the capacity in our hospitals. Our hospitals are still fine for the most
Mm.
part. Yeah. So, are you guys worried
Worried about COVID?
about COVID and going back into the classroom?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I
Now
think
we
Okay.
used to.
everyone is worried. COVID
we,
is a worrying thing.
Well, okay, so I can understand that. Hopefully the university institutes a situation where they don't use the same classroom back to back periods,
Yeah.
so that there's
Correct.
time to clean the classrooms after each period, right?
Exactly.
So people come in and then and that the breaks will be a little bit longer so that you can have time to go wash your hands, things like that
Yeah.
between classes, right? So that would, if people do that and wear masks, then I think the risks are quite low, actually. Yeah, so I
Yes.
think it's probably much safer. You can never be 100% guaranteed safe. I can go to the grocery store and pick up COVID just by going to buy my milk.
Yeah.
So you can't be perfectly safe, right?
Yeah.
Right, right. So are there some other questions concerning this?
yeah, yeah. My second question.
Mm.
Under the new guidelines, under the new guidelines, can you listen?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. Under the new guidelines, what are business going to post on website concerning the risk assessments?
Well, they're going to be a little bit shady about it. So what
Correct.
businesses will post, they'll only post regulations. They won't post any other extra stuff that they're doing, right? So right now they're saying that with the masks being mandatory inside. So let's say this example, the masks inside the businesses, they'll post it that it's up to the store, but the store, if it's a store, for example, but the store can ask a person who's not wearing a mask to leave. But then it's up to them to enforce it too, right? So they say we won't serve you unless you're wearing a mask. And so they'll only post that regulation, but they won't actually post what you can expect as their response. Because what they'll do is hope that you'll take the necessary measures, that they don't have to enforce it, right? Because the more that they have to enforce it, the harder it is on them, the more expensive it is on them, the more chances for creating conflict is on them. So they'll just say it and hope that you comply. That's probably what's going to happen. So they'll be a little bit dodgy because maybe they won't have a worked out exact response. They just post the regulation and then that's it.
which are mandatory.
I'm
Post
sorry.
only those things.
Yeah, they'll only post the regulation. That they won't post. They will not post what their particular responses is because they'll try to give themselves flexibility, as much flexibility as possible, so that they don't put themselves into a difficult situation. So just the regulation, that'll be enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what businesses will do. Yeah. Cool.
Nehadeep.
Other questions?
Yeah,
So,
Nehadeep.
yep.
Nehadeep,
So, sir, I want to ask you, how can business effectively communicate with all the customers, visitors, and contractors and ensure that messaging about the social distancing and keeping the workplace is consistent?
Well, generally they've developed protocols. Okay, so here's an example. So I just bought a house. So, and I went through the whole point of looking at the whole thing of looking at houses during COVID. So every time I went to visit a house or I went to an office, they would make appointments ahead of time. So they would add in one protocol. Let's make appointments. Don't just drop in, right? And for most cases that will work, where you make an appointment. You have to go and make an appointment first and then go. Before, you can't just drop in. So that's the same thing with like, say, suppliers and that type of thing. So with that protocol in place, then people will arrange a time and then they'll send out preset made guidelines and say, these are our guidelines. So when you come in, we will have no touch service. We will stand 2 meters away from you or more, or at least 2 meters away from you. And then they'll give out protocols like this type of thing. And we ask that you sanitize before you enter a building, before you enter our building, and after you leave or as you're leaving. So they'll put in these kind of protocols in place, and usually those protocols will come from a head office somewhere, and so the employees will just have to implement those protocols. That's kind of how they'll do it. How they communicate it is at the points of communication. So it'll be communicated both. They'll have things that they should say if they're talking to a customer or a supplier, or they'll have attachments to emails to say, please review our COVID protocols before entering our workplace. So that can be rather systematically done. And in certain cases, they may provide services in alternative ways because they can't provide it in the normal way because social distancing is too complex, right? So, or physical distancing, I should always call it physical distancing instead of social distancing, is too complex. But generally, they establish protocols from head office, and then at the points of communication before meeting, that gets communicated at that point. Yeah, so they won't send out mass emails, and the ones that send out mass emails tend to get ignored.
Yeah.
So I've had a few mass emails, for example, from places like Canadian Tire or that kind of thing, because I'm a member of I have a points card from Canadian Tire, so they sent me out an email, but I didn't read it, or barely read it. Mass emails most people don't read the mass emails anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if it's an individual communication, then it'll be heard. So every time, that's why it's at the appointment stage where they communicate it.
Yeah, like when we go to Best Buy, a lady is standing over there to tell you that we have these guidelines. They have pasted on the wall when
Yeah.
we enter this Best Buy, and they said just read it and then go in.
Yeah, so it's first point of contact, right? That's
Yeah.
right when you're walking in the store. So that's the first point of contact. So you have to look at it first, know the expectations, and then when you go in, you'll understand the type of service you're going to be getting based on
Yeah.
the consciousness of the pandemic.
Yes, like
Right.
you may be contacted if anything, any uh, patient of coronavirus detected in our store, you also maybe contacted some kind of these guidelines.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Cool.
Thank you,
That,
sir.
yeah, good question.
So the next question is, in terms of hygiene and cleaning, what steps should business put in place before staff return?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. They need to support, so they need to have steps in place, and they need to do things to support their staff to take those steps. Okay, so I did an interview in class. I did a kind of polling in class in one of the classes where I asked about hand hygiene, for example. So I was doing statistics about how often people wash their hands, how long they wash their hands for each time they wash their hands, and how many people use soap. All three of those things affect the spread of the virus, right?
Yes.
So in terms of hygiene, for example, you're talking about hygiene, those three things are seen to primarily reduce if you wash your hands for longer, more often, and using soap more frequently, it will reduce the spread of the virus. So I did this in a class filled with international students, and I did it in a class filled with local students. So I can't explain all the math about it, but what I found was about 20% better hygiene was done by the international students rather than the local students. Okay, so the international students followed better hygiene practices than the local students did. So, I mean, it was a survey between two classes. And so it was only like 25 people on one side and 22 people on another, right? So I did a percentage thing on it, just a bit of research on my own, just to sort of see who has better hygiene. And so what you find is that what I found is, to answer your question about what should businesses do differently in preparation for staff coming back, they need to give slightly longer and more frequent longer breaks and more frequent breaks in order to practice good hygiene. So people can go wash their hands, and they need to have a dedicated, clean, sanitized place for people to do that.
Yeah.
So like if you're in a store, if you're in a Walmart, you'll know if you've ever used a public washroom in a Walmart, it's not perfectly hygienic, right?
Okay.
It's always in various stages of hygiene. But it's not perfectly hygienic. They need a dedicated place for staff to have a perfectly hygienic place to wash their hands. And they need to give more time in the schedule for them to be able to do that, right? So that's one step. Another step is to talk about what are the conditions on being able to come to work at all, right? So there are places where, like, if you're feeling sick, don't come to work, right? So that you've probably heard this already in your workplaces.
Yeah.
But they also need to potentially check for fever before the start of a shift. So they have one dedicated person doing temperature checks,
Yeah.
because people will lie, go, oh, I need the money, so I'm going to work,
Yeah, it happens.
right? And then they put people in danger when they do that, right? So that's a challenge. So you have to have a hard policy about that. And I know people need money. That's the way it is. But in this case, you shouldn't be coming to work sick. It's different if you have a cold, right? But if it's some of the more specialized symptoms of COVID, fever is one of them. And so you kind of have to you have to be quite careful about before letting someone come into the workplace to do that. So it's probably best that that's done at the entry and exit points of the shifts, right? So so that when a person is coming into the store, there should be a temperature check for staff, and possibly even for customers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, that's difficult and expensive to do because you got to pay somebody to be doing those temperature checks, and then they are the ones that are having to come close to people who might be potentially sick. So you have to protect those workers doing that as well. So there's some investment that has to happen by business on part, but they need to teach their staff. So the other thing is that staff have to cooperate. So there has to be a little bit of an education program and training program about it. So they could develop a little bit of a 30-minute online thing. How do you know if you have COVID or not? Or what are the steps to take if you think you might? And they need to teach people that. That information's out there. It's not that it's not out there, but I think the companies have to do a job to deliver that information and make sure it gets delivered. Yeah, so those are some of the steps that companies can do to protect staff and protect all stakeholders in their business.
Yeah, like I went to, I think, TNC Mart, I think. I don't know the exact name.
Mhm.
That is the Chinese store, I think.
Okay, TNT?
TNT, yeah.
Yeah,
TNT.
TNT supermarket. Yep.
Yeah, we went there and the lady is standing over there to check our temperature. She's
Right.
whole covered and she's doing with every customer. And she's also providing the mask to us
Right.
if you don't have.
Right. I
And the
mean,
money with those masks, like she's giving it for $1. The money with that, they are giving it to the charity. They're not using it.
yeah, which means that they've purchased it, and if they are giving it to the charity, that means they're taking the expense. They're bearing the expense of those masks, and
Yeah.
that's good. That's good, and in a sense, I trust organizations that come from outside of North America more than I trust the information from the companies inside North America. Having lived abroad, I understand how people get afraid of general mass sickness. Because I lived in Thailand. Thailand's quite a dense population, not like India. India is very dense, and China is very dense, but Thailand is also dense. And people would wear masks frequently to protect themselves and to protect other people. It was just kind of a common thing. People were like, "Yeah, we'll do this because we know." Right? In Thailand, dengue fever, for example, was a particularly widespread sickness within Thailand, and it's often mosquito borne, but it can be passed to other people. And so they already have protocols in for things like dengue fever. Like, so these protocols are like, oh yeah, put a mask on. Oh, there's a pandemic. Okay, I'm going to put a mask on. Everybody's got a store of them already. People go, okay, I'm going to wash my hands, and then they already have in a lot of cases, they have better hygiene. So especially in Thailand, for example, and I think people in South Asia or Southeast Asia, close to the equator, they already know we better be practicing good hygiene, right? So my experience, Thailand, for example, was the most hygienic place.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Good. Great question.
Thank you
Are there?
so much, sir.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So Rupinder,
So, like, how
Mm.
will you best communicate with staff to ensure their ongoing health, safety, and well-being?
ask like you care. That's the first one. Always establish it with a kind of rule of care. Don't ask, like if I'm a boss and Rupinder, you're my staff member, for
Mhm.
example, right? In this case, and if I was going to ask you if I'm worried about the staff's ongoing care, I would ask as a manager. This is just a personal characteristic. How's it going for you, Rupinder? Have you been feeling well these days? Um, um, are you able to manage your life? And I would just ask sort of general questions. Are you able to manage
Mhm.
a job and school and living in another country and physical distancing? Are you managing that okay? And then give you a chance to talk. And then I might listen for things that you would say that might be health related issues.
Yeah.
But I would ask because I care about you, Rupinder, not because I'm protecting a business,
Mhm.
right? So the manager has to care about their staff first, right? So if you care about your staff first, you're going to get more compliance, right? And this is a big deal because a lot of people go, we have to protect the business, and they're speaking like business people. And that's a little bit, excuse my language, is a little bit bullshit because it's not actually caring, and you're not going to get as much compliance when you're talking in such formal language, right? You have to make it connected, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm going to ask you, Rupinder, I'm going to say, I'm going to care about you, Rupinder, not the general world
Yeah.
or the business or those. I'm going to just talk about it personally, right? But I will listen for health-related concerns and
Yeah.
go, oh, if you express health-related concerns, maybe we need to follow that a little bit and see if there's a danger,
All right.
right? So, but first you ask the person about themselves, and then you kind of listen for maybe are there dangerous things in what they're saying,
Definitely.
right?
Makes sense. Yeah. So
Right.
the next thing I'm just gonna ask you is like you have your English center in Thailand, right? So what step would you take before you reopen your workplace?
We have taken it, and so we flipped to online learning, and we employed teaching assistants to have one-on-ones with students. So we would have group classes typically, right, with 6 to 8
All right.
students in a class, maybe 12, up maximum 12 students in a class, and a
Mhm.
minimum of 4, right? So we won't run a class unless it's in that 4 to 12 range.
Mhm.
But we can't really put them all together in a room, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, makes sense.
And in Thailand, they've responded very well. So there are some regulations that have come from the government that said you had to shut down. So we flipped to online learning right off the bat.
Right.
So, but then we had group classes, so the teachers would run group classes. But then they would also, we did an additional thing. So we
Mhm.
would run teaching assistants to touch base once a week with each student
All right.
and have a bit of, do you have some questions about your lesson? Is there something I can do? So I had one teaching assistant kind of go in and do that. And it's not a trained teacher, but it's there to help them with their studies. And so that was still online. And now Thailand has reopened again.
All right.
So in that situation, we've gone back into the classroom and we put it in where we run half classes online, half classes in the classroom. But
All right.
we get so normally they would go on a two schedule a week, so they come for lessons twice a week.
Mhm.
One day they come in and one day they stay home, right? So you'd have let's say you have a class of 6 people, 3 of them would be in the room, but they could be separated then. But the teacher would be teaching them and teaching online, so they'd have a camera set up, right,
Yeah.
and with a microphone set up. So we had to get some technology, we had to buy some technology to be able to do that,
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
but we did. And so 3 students were in the class and 3 students were this way, and the teacher would always be wearing a mask in class.
Due
But
to
I
this,
think it will be very
Mhm.
difficult for the teacher wearing mask and teaching the students.
Yeah, but they love their jobs.
Yeah, we can, a person wearing mask, we can't able to understand him or her properly, right?
Mhm.
There
so
is
what
some kind of
so what happens in that situation, right? So you have the mask up like this.
Mhm.
When you're close, um, you have the mask up when you're close to the people, right? So if you're standing back, you can take the mask off, but when you're close, you have to put it on. Now, fortunately, it's a culture where people have worn masks before, so there, in a sense, there's a bit of use to. It's harder for the white teachers or for the foreign teachers.
All right.
It's harder for the foreign teachers because it's a new protocol for them. But for people who live there, the people go, yeah, we kind of know this already. It's a little bit standard for us. That's why places like Taiwan and Thailand, they've been among the, and Korea and China, they've been among the best responders to the pandemic because there's been a culture of it already because they've dealt with epidemics in their own environments already.
All right.
Yeah. So they have a history of having to deal with it, right? Korea dealt with SARS very strongly, had to deal with SARS in the past, and dengue fever, like I mentioned in Thailand. Like so, and Taiwan responded early, so they dealt with it really fast.
All right.
Yeah.
So are there other questions? I think maybe Harpreet, you might have a question or
Yeah,
two left,
I'm
right?
glad. Yeah.
Mm.
Like, how you think business will communicate with the trade unions and the vendors after returning back to the plans?
Probably with gratefulness, first of all, because there's an essential amount of trust that has to happen with the unions and with vendors in order to make it all work, right? They have to work together to make it work. A company
Yeah.
can't do it without their vendors, and a company can't do it without the cooperation of the staff. So I think what you're going to see is the communication is going to be a lot more trust based than it was in the past.
Yeah, because if the vendors are sending the things to the store, they have to sanitize it fully, right? It will come into contact with the driver and with the person who is unloading it. So it will take so much of precaution, I think.
Yes. Um, yeah, it will take a lot of precautions, and people will have had to cooperate all the way through it. And so the challenge with that, of course, is how it is that when people go through difficult times together,
Yeah.
they end up building more trust. Think of it that way, right? If you go through a difficult time with your friend and you go through it together, the trust increases with your friend. You find a deeper bond kind of happening, and I think that will naturally happen between businesses. And so you're going to have that kind of trust that starts to build. So this is the sort of hidden opportunity in this situation. There's a hidden opportunity, what you're asking about here, because that opportunity to develop trust with your vendors and your work environment will make your business be better in the long run. And over the long term, that will actually develop, or it should. And if it doesn't develop, then you probably have bad actors in your organization.
Yes, of
You'll
course.
you'll have bad faith actors in your organization, and then that's an employee. You can kind of vet those people out eventually and get them out of that sort of relationship, out of those relationships, and put them either in other places or get them out of your company, right?
Yeah.
So I think the communication with vendors and with trade unions is really important, because that's actually the foundations of the business, right? That's the structure of how the business gets done. And if you can build that structure strongly, you probably have a good, strong business afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next question is like, how will the business communicate with their staff members and employers for their well-being?
Openly, hopefully they know who they can call, right, or talk to. Hopefully,
Yeah.
you know, if I have a problem and I'm feeling sick, who am I going to call? Who's your first point of contact when you have this sort of situation? Hopefully that's part of the protocols, that you've developed a point of contact. You contact your manager, your line manager directly, or you contact this person. This is the phone number. Here's the email. Let us know as soon as possible when you start feeling sick, that kind of thing. Hopefully they know that, and feel free to just use it,
Okay.
right? That's the big deal, right? So for example, if you guys ever had a problem, you know that I'm not always online, right? So you'd have to make an appointment with me. If you'd have to email me if you were having any difficulty whatsoever. But at least you guys know that that's your first point of contact. Contact your instructor right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
So then you can feel free to do that, right? That has to be open. It has to be honest. So in a teacher student situation, that's the case, even though there's a larger institution in the background, and but I'm still your first point of contact, right? And then but hopefully in workplaces you also have the same thing. I can talk to that person and get open and honest, and then they have to be trained how to receive that kind of information, right? So
Yeah.
they have to be capable of being able to do that. So let me pause for a second here. All right, are there any last questions?
No, just all these. Do you guys have any?
No.
So that's all we wanted to ask.
I'm sorry, say again, Rupinder.
That's all we wanted to
That's
ask.
all. That's all. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you so much for the interview, guys. So I'm going to talk like a teacher now. So I'll pause the video.